From growing up in the dangerous city of Tijuana, a city where dog eat dog is the law of the land. Wait, what? He didn't grow up in TJ? Okay, but he grew up in TJ, but didn't grow up in the streets. Okay, let's try that again. Coming from the country of Mexico, most famously known in the fight world for birthing fearless warriors, descendants from the Aztecs and the Spanish conquistadors, Mexico has no shortage of warriors. Brandon Moreno, from the very beginning, knew he would be a warrior, just like his ancestors. Wait, what? He didn't know he wanted to be a fighter until when? Okay, let's try this one more time. Brandon Moreno's story is not your usual cliche UFC special. For as much as we look into his story and background, Brandon is no ordinary fighter. Unlike many fighters, Brandon did not come from a broken home, and he did not live on the streets. And he definitely did not sell piñatas to help his family like the UFC would like you to believe. What separates Brandon the most from other fighters is his proximity of being a normal person. Like many fans, he comes from a modest family. His family created a successful business selling piñatas, allowing Brandon to have a comfortable life compared to what many fighters grew up in. His family was also an anomaly by Mexican standards. Given that no one in the family was interested in sports, Mexico famously loves their soccer and their boxing. But for Brandon and his dad, that was not of interest. Instead, his interest in fighting started at a pajama party. A neighbor of Brandon had invited him over to watch cartoons and have a good old boys' night. Well, at that pajama party, his neighbor showed him some sweet moves that piqued Brandon's interest. Brandon was at the time a little overweight, given that his biggest hobby was snacking on Mexican candy while watching Dragon Ball Z. An avid gamer, Brandon also loved Tekken 3. So naturally, like all of us, he wanted to be Eddie Gordo. But after his mom failed to find him a capoeira gym in Tijuana, surprising, I know, he ends up in the only MMA gym in TJ. Here, Brandon learns the basics of striking, but was far from a legitimate MMA gym. So, this is where things get interesting. A couple of his teammates had moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico to train at the Jackson Gym, a gym where legends like BJ Penn, Frank Mir, George St. Pierre, Holly Holmes, John Jones, Rashad Evans, Carlos Condit had called home before. To Brandon, it was a no-brainer to also go to New Mexico once the opportunity arose. This is where the true love for MMA is born. Brandon goes undefeated 5-0 and claiming the flyweight title at the World Fighting Federation promotion. So instead of becoming a nutritionist or a lawyer like he originally planned, Brandon wanted to punch people in the face for a living. Brandon is then selected for the Ultimate Fighter, having failed to make it once before to the Ultimate Fighter Latin America. But to get to this point, Brandon had a record of 6-3 and had some hard losses throughout the way. Doubt and lack of real competition in Mexico had sowed doubts in his decisions. The Ultimate Fighter would be a test to know if Brandon belonged in the UFC. But before we go forward, I would like to introduce Henry Cejudo to this timeline. Henry needs very little introduction. He is a gold medalist multiple times in the Pan American Games, Olympic gold medalist representing the United States in the 2008 Beijing Olympics. Henry would also go on to have a stellar UFC career, beating all-time greats of the division and multiple world-class fighters. He would become a double champ in the UFC, beating Demetrius Johnson and TJ Dillashaw in title fights. Henry looked unstoppable. While Henry was soaring, Brandon was grinding. Brandon has won the flyweight title in Arizona while Henry was 9-0 in the UFC, making his way to the top. You see, the promotional company that Brandon was flyweight champion for was owned by Henry's wrestling coach, who was searching for sparring to help Henry during camp versus Josier Formiga. Brandon had the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu background to help Henry tighten up his BJJ. Henry brought Brandon into camp and the two quickly became friends. Brandon describes that Henry was very nice and helped him in many ways. Not only by training with him, Henry also helped out Brandon by helping him with food, providing a place to stay, and even helped Brandon get his wife over in the States. Needless to say, the scenario sounds like Henry and Brandon were close. By the time Brandon was called by the Ultimate Fighter, Henry had lost to Demetrius Johnson. So to regain a title shot, he had to fight title contender Joseph Benavidez. And to create hype and animosity between Benavidez and Cejudo, Dana White picked them as the coaches for the Ultimate Fighter, at the same Ultimate Fighter that Brandon Moreno had been called to. In the Ultimate Fighter, the coaches select the teams. The fighters are ranked and the top seed fights the lowest ranked fighter. But the rankings were revealed as they are chosen. So let's say if you're chosen first and you're ranked number 1, the number 1 ranked fighter, he would fight the number 16th ranked fighter. So to recap the scenario, Henry is close with Brandon, who shared his home and fight camp with Brandon, was first to pick in the Ultimate Fighter, a tournament meant to showcase new and up-and-coming fighters who are rewarded with a title shot if they win it all. So one would assume that Henry, having first pick, would choose his teammate first, the guy he helped bring his wife over to the States, the guy who sleeps under his roof. But blinded by wanting to beat Joseph Benavidez, Henry wanted to gain an edge, throwing friendship aside and selecting the number 1 ranked fighter in the tournament. Life would make Henry pay for that decision, because the 16th ranked fighter was Brandon Moreno, and the rules state that the opposite seed of the one chosen would be coached by the other team. So Brandon was not only passed up as first pick by Henry, but he would also be the lowest ranked fighter, pitting friends against each other because Henry would eventually have to man the corner against Brandon. Benavidez and Henry had a fierce rivalry that was magnified by the show. So maybe his decision was blinded by his competitiveness, and this caused him to put his friendship aside. But it's most likely that Henry believed that Brandon was not the talent we all know. This would cause the relationship to deteriorate. Brandon describes in his interview that Henry spoke to him after this and he was being apologetic about the whole ordeal. But he was heartbroken and hurt that his close friend would pass up on choosing him and would now have to face him. Brandon would go on to lose against Pantoja, winning performance of the night. This one brilliant opportunity would become a nightmare for Brandon. He had lost his first fight and also lost a friend, or at least someone he considered a friend and maybe even a brother. The loss would send Brandon back to TJ with no offer from the UFC, but life would give Brandon another opportunity and the UFC came knocking. In a unique set of events, Brandon had a chance to fight Louis Smolka as a late-minute fill-in. Meanwhile, the season of The Ultimate Fighter that Henry and him were both part of was still airing on TV. The season started on August 32nd of 2016. Henry and Benavidez were set to fight on December 3rd, shortly after the season ended on the 30th of November. Brandon had lost to Pantoja on episode 1 and was out of the picture. He explains that the opportunity to fight Smolka came when he had no training partners in TJ. And Henry, who he felt betrayed by, was coaching the man who he once chosen over him and the man who had eliminated him, Alex Pantoja. Meanwhile, Benavidez was making a team of killers in the weight class of Brandon. So once again, Benavidez offered a lending hand to Brandon and welcomed him into camp. So Brandon's only choice were to stay in TJ and kick bags, or go to Arizona with Pantoja and Henry Cejudo, or Brandon chose new beginnings and Benavidez was now his new home. He would defeat Smolka via submission and his debut would earn him many fans. Meanwhile, Cejudo felt betrayed by Brandon for having joined Benavidez. Cejudo would then lose to Benavidez in December. Brandon would then earn himself a headline event after having gone 3-0 in the UFC. In an effort to expand their brand, the UFC was trying to break into the Latin American market. The creation of the Latin American Ultimate Fighter and the bringing of a main event to Mexico was evident of it. The UFC needed a product to push in Latin America and specifically Mexico, a market that Cejudo felt he deserved. After all, he is Mexican American and his mother is from Mexico. Henry was also a gold medalist in the Pan American Games, spoke Spanish, and is an admirable individual. He loved his mom and his country. He was never in any drug scandals, and not to mention a gold medalist in the 2008 Olympics in Beijing. Henry would be the DC for the Mexican market. But markets are hard to predict, and no matter how much you want people to adopt the product, there is a chance it might fail. That's the nature of the market. They're unpredictable. But Cejudo never got the love he desired from Mexican fans. Unlike Cain Velasquez, Henry did not get embraced by the Mexican fans. He did, after all, represent the United States and not Mexico in wrestling, an opportunity he had due to his mother. Henry also had a style that never really worked with Mexican fans. He loved to talk about his accomplishments. He boasted about his gold medal. Rarely did he speak Spanish or address Mexico in particular. It was only UFC specials that ever had Cejudo speaking about his heritage. So when the UFC went to Mexico City to put on a show, Henry felt like he was the one to headline. But the UFC had other plans. The 3-0 Mexican from TJ got the nod against Sergio Pettis. This, I'm sure, rubbed the Cringe King in the wrong way, having been passed up by his older friend for a main event. Brandon would lose this event to Pettis, who would go on to lose to Cejudo. Brandon would also have his shot at redemption after losing to Pettis by facing Alex Pantoja again in Chile, an opportunity to even the score with the man who derailed his career. But life would not be kind to Brandon. This time, he lost to Pantoja via unanimous decision. The UFC would then cut Brandon from the promotion after having lost 2 times back-to-back. Fast forward to the present day. Henry had become double champ and retired due to contract disputes. Brandon would go on a second run in the UFC that saw him crowned UFC champ, creating a moment we all know so well. Through all of this, the beef between Cejudo and Brandon was slowly building, coming to a boiling point in the trilogy fight of Figgy vs. Brandon 3. Having fought a close fight and then losing decisively the second, Figgy needed help. And to gain an edge, Figgy sought the help of Brandon's old friend Henry Cejudo. And what a better way for Cejudo to inject himself and stay relevant. Figgy states he sought out Cejudo for help given he's a future Hall of Famer. In addition, Cejudo publicly claims he knows all of Brandon's secrets. In hopes to learn something from the ex-champ, the two teamed up. Henry went on a cringe campaign to disparage Brandon as a traitor. But when looking at the footage, the one that set things in motion was Cejudo. He chose to win at all costs over friendship. Henry claimed Brandon left to train with Benavidez, who he hated, so Henry takes it as betrayal, without considering that Brandon had to train for a fight while Henry was coaching Pantoja. What if Henry had chosen his friend first? Sure, Brandon was unknown, and he didn't know that he was the lowest seed, but he knew the risk he was taking. He wants to claim it's some sort of calculated risk due to Brandon flying under the radar. The fact is, Henry's decision is what set all of these events in motion. He was blinded by his competitive spirit. That decision came at a cost. That cost was his friendship with Brandon, and he knew it. Here's the clip of what he thought.
What I did, it was like it was wrong. It was an accident. That wasn't meant to be.
So he was very well aware that it was a possibility. But I ask you, will you risk losing your friendship over picking teams? For Cejudo, the only thing riding in the Ultimate Fighter season was his ego. For Brandon, it was an opportunity to change his life and those around him. Yet he still took that risk. Henry could call it what he wants, but he struck the first blow. He fractured a relationship that looked like a brotherhood, and I can't blame Moreno for it. In the end, he needs to look out for himself, and in that episode, he learned that even those close around him don't have his best interests. Because in the long term, it was a foolish decision that could have been avoided. And now the tables have turned and Brandon is a world superstar, became the first Mexican-born UFC fighter in history, is involved in one of the most memorable rivalries that is on par with Pacquiao and Juan Manuel Marquez. Meanwhile, Henry's looking to stay relevant in the UFC, coaching other fighters and talking smack as the Cringe King. What happens in the 4th fight with Figgy, I'm not sure. What I am sure of is that this beef is far from over. In the next couple of months, things will get more intense. More insults and accusations will come forward. I have a suspicion that Henry might be a little jealous of Brandon. After all, he's got a few things that Henry does not: a title shot, relevancy, and universal love, not to mention the support of a country. For the record, I don't think Henry's a bad person, but I think he committed a mistake. And due to his ego, he can't help but double down. After all, it is his ego that got him into this. Only time will tell how this story unfolds. Maybe one day, with enough interest, we see a bad blood fight between Henry and Brandon. And I'm all here for it.